The water's surface rippled as Virginia Miller lowered the wooden bucket into the well, her trembling hands betraying the fear she fought to conceal. She had fled her wedding not 2 hours ago, leaving behind a man she could not love and a future she could not bear. Now, hidden beside this abandoned well on the outskirts of Silverdale, she wondered if she'd made the gravest mistake of her 20-year-old life. It was 1878, and choices for women in the Arizona Territory were limited at best. Virginia had been promised to Harold Blackwell, a man 30 years her senior with wealth enough to save her family's struggling ranch. But standing at the altar, watching his cold eyes assess her like cattle at auction, something inside her had broken free. She'd run. Through the small church, past the shocked faces of townsfolk, out into the harsh afternoon sun, her white wedding dress billowing behind her like a surrender flag. She'd found a horse not even caring whose it was and rode until the animal tired, finding herself miles from town near this forgotten homestead with its solitary well. Virginia sank to her knees, the once pristine fabric of her dress now soiled with dust and tears. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her blood run cold. Harold's men would be searching for her by now. Panic seized her as she scrambled behind the stone wall of the well, pulling her voluminous skirts tight against her body to remain hidden. The rider approached slowly, the steady clip-clop of his horse's hooves growing louder in the still afternoon air. Virginia held her breath, pressing herself against the rough stones. "Hello," a man's voice called out. It wasn't Harold's harsh tone, nor the gruff voices of his ranch hands. This voice carried a gentle drawl, tinged with curiosity rather than anger. "I saw someone by this well just a moment ago. I don't mean any harm." Virginia remained silent, weighing her options. The stranger dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. She could hear him walking toward the well. "I know someone's here," he continued. "Your horse is tied up not 20 yards away." His footsteps circled the well until he stood directly before her hiding spot. Virginia looked up to see a young man, perhaps 25, with kind blue eyes and sun-bronzed skin. He wore simple clothes, dusty trousers, a faded blue shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that cast shadows across his handsome face. Most notably, he wasn't wearing a gun belt like Harold's men always did. "Are you in trouble, miss?" he asked, crouching down to her level. Virginia nodded, unable to find her voice. "I'm Daniel Jackson," he said, offering his hand. "Most folks call me Drew." "Virginia Miller," she replied, tentatively accepting his hand. I've done something foolish." Drew glanced at her wedding dress, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You're running from a wedding," she nodded again, tears threatening to spill. "I couldn't go through with it. Harold is a cruel man. My father insisted the match would save our ranch, but I just couldn't." Drew stood, scanning the horizon. "Harold Blackwell, the cattle baron, you know him?" Virginia asked, fear creeping back into her voice. "Everyone knows Blackwell," Drew replied grimly, "and you're right about him being cruel." He extended his hand again. "Come on, you can't stay here." "His men will be searching every inch of land between town and his ranch." Virginia hesitated. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Drew's expression softened. "My sister was forced to marry a man like Blackwell 3 years ago. She didn't survive the winter." Pain flashed across his features. "I wasn't there to help her then. I can help you now." Something in his honest gaze convinced Virginia. She placed her hand in his and allowed him to help her to her feet. "My place isn't far," Drew explained, leading her toward his horse. "It's not much, but you'll be safe there while we figure out what to do next." Virginia questioned. Drew paused, turning to face her. "I won't leave you to face Blackwell alone. No one should have that fate." He helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. "Hold tight," he instructed, his arms encircling her as he took the reins. Virginia felt an unexpected warmth spread through her as Drew's chest pressed against her back. Despite the danger, despite the uncertainty of her future, something about this stranger's kindness made her feel safer than she had in months. As they rode away from the well, Virginia couldn't help but wonder if her impulsive escape had led her not to ruin, but to an unexpected chance at freedom. Drew's cabin sat nestled against the foothills, partially hidden by a stand of cottonwood trees. It was small but sturdy, with a corral for horses and a modest garden plot. As they approached, Virginia noted the careful craftsmanship of the structure. This was a home built by patient hands. "It's not much compared to Blackwell's estate," Drew said as he helped her dismount, "but it's mine, free and clear." "It's lovely," Virginia replied sincerely. After the ostentatious displays of wealth at Harold's ranch, the simple beauty of Drew's homestead felt refreshingly honest. Inside, the cabin was neat and practical. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a wooden table with 2 chairs occupied another, and a bed with a colorful quilt stood in the corner. Drew quickly lit a lamp as the evening light began to fade. "You can take the bed," he offered. "I'll sleep by the fire." Virginia glanced down at her wedding dress, now torn and dirty from her escape. "I can't thank you enough for your kindness, Mr. Jackson." "Drew, please," he insisted with a small smile. "And you don't need to thank me, I'm just doing what's right." He moved to a wooden trunk and pulled out a simple cotton dress. "This was my sister's. It might fit you well enough until we can figure something else out." Virginia accepted the dress gratefully. "Your sister, what was her name?" "Elizabeth," Drew answered softly. "She was a lot like you, brave enough to know what she wanted, even if the world tried to tell her otherwise." After Drew stepped outside to give her privacy, Virginia changed out of her wedding gown. The dress was simple but clean, a pale blue that complemented her auburn hair. When Drew returned, he had a pot of coffee brewing and was slicing bread and cheese. "We should talk about what happens next," he said as they sat at the table. "Blackwell isn't a man who takes kindly to being crossed. He'll have men searching everywhere." Virginia's appetite vanished at the mention of Harold. "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "My family's ranch is failing. That's why my father arranged the marriage. If I go home, he'll just send me back to Harold." "What do you want, Virginia?" Drew asked, his blue eyes studying her intently. The question startled her. No one had asked what she wanted in so long. "I want," she began, then faltered. "I want freedom. A chance to make my own choices, to maybe someday marry a man I love, not one I fear." Drew nodded thoughtfully. "There's a town about 3 days' ride from here, Willowbrook. I have a friend there who runs a general store. She might be able to offer you work, a place to start over." "You'd help me get there?" Virginia asked, hope blooming in her chest. "I would," Drew confirmed. "But we should wait a few days before setting out. Let the initial search die down a bit." That night, despite her exhaustion, Virginia found sleep elusive. She lay in Drew's bed, listening to his steady breathing from his bedroll near the fireplace. A man she barely knew had shown her more kindness in a day than Harold had in all the months of their courtship. It confused and comforted her all at once. The next morning, Virginia woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Drew stood by the stove, his back to her as he prepared breakfast. Morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating his broad shoulders and the gentle way he moved. "Good morning," she called softly, sitting up. Drew turned with a smile that transformed his already handsome face into something that made Virginia's heart skip. "Morning. I hope you slept well." "Better than I expected," she admitted, rising from the bed. She smoothed down Elizabeth's dress, suddenly conscious of her appearance. After breakfast, Drew showed Virginia around his small property. He had 5 horses in his corral, 2 of his own and 3 he was training for neighbors. "You're a horse trainer?" Virginia asked, watching him gentle a spirited bay mare. Drew nodded. "My father taught me, said I had a way with the difficult ones." His hands moved confidently over the mare's neck, his voice a soothing murmur. "Animals know when you respect them, when you're patient enough to earn their trust rather than demanding it." Virginia watched, mesmerized by the quiet communication between man and animal. "Harold breaks his horses," she said quietly. "I always hated watching. They come back with empty eyes." Drew's expression darkened. That tells you everything you need to know about a man, how he treats creatures who can't fight back. They spent the day tending to chores around the cabin. Virginia insisted on helping, grateful to feel useful. As they worked side by side in companionable silence, she found herself studying Drew when he wasn't looking, the careful precision of his movements, the kindness in his eyes, the way the corner of his mouth lifted slightly when he was concentrating. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Virginia felt a peace she hadn't known in years. "Tell me about your family," Drew said, breaking the comfortable silence. Virginia sighed. "My mother died when I was 15. My father, he's a good man at heart, but the drought hit our ranch hard. We've been struggling for years." She twisted a loose thread on her borrowed dress. "When Harold offered to pay off our debts in exchange for marriage, Father saw it as our salvation. And you?" "I saw a prison," she admitted. "Harold is possessive, controlling, the way he looked at me." She shuddered. "But Father insisted I was being childish, that security was more important than some romantic notion of love." Drew was quiet for a long moment. "My father used to say that a marriage without respect isn't worth the paper it's written on. Sounds like your instincts were right about Blackwell." Virginia turned to study Drew's profile in the fading light. "What about you? You live out here alone, there's no Mrs. Jackson." A sad smile touched Drew's lips. "There was someone once, Martha Caldwell. We were going to get married when I returned from delivering horses to Fort Benton." His voice grew distant. "While I was gone, typhoid swept through the area. Martha, her parents, my father, all gone within weeks." "I'm so sorry," Virginia whispered, instinctively reaching for his hand. Drew's fingers curled around hers, warm and reassuring despite his painful memories. "It was 3 years ago now. I came back to nothing but this land and the horses." He squeezed her hand gently. "But I've made peace with it. Built something new." As darkness fell completely, they remained on the porch, hands still joined, sharing stories of their lives until the stars blanketed the sky above them. Virginia couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so comfortable with anyone, let alone a man she'd known for only a day. On the third morning of Virginia's stay, disaster struck. She was hanging laundry while Drew worked with the horses when she spotted riders approaching 6 men, all wearing the distinctive hats of Harold's ranch hands. "Drew," she called, panic rising in her throat. He was at her side instantly, following her gaze to the approaching riders. "Get inside," he instructed calmly. "Take only what you need. There's a trapdoor under the rug, it leads to a root cellar. Hide there." "What about you?" Virginia asked, clutching his arm. "I'll handle them," Drew assured her. "Go now, quickly." Heart pounding, Virginia gathered her few belongings and found the hidden trapdoor. The cellar beneath was small but clean, with shelves of preserved food along one wall. She closed the door above her and waited in the dim light that filtered through the floorboards, straining to hear what was happening. Hoofbeats approached the cabin, then stopped. Male voices called out greetings. She recognized Drew's voice, steady and friendly. "Afternoon, gentlemen." "What brings Blackwell's men out this way?" "Looking for a runaway bride," a gruff voice replied. "Blackwell's fiancée took off on her wedding day. Red hair, pretty little thing. Seen anyone matching that description?" "Can't say that I have," Drew replied easily. "Been pretty quiet out here." "Mind if we take a look around?" the man pressed. Virginia held her breath, her hands trembling in the darkness. "Actually, I do mind." Drew's voice was still pleasant but had taken on a steely edge. "I've got no reason to lie to you boys, and I don't appreciate the suggestion that I would." A tense silence followed. "Blackwell won't be happy," another voice warned. "Then Blackwell can come talk to me himself," Drew replied. "But I haven't seen his bride, and I'd appreciate it if you'd respect my property." More silence, then the sound of horses shifting restlessly. "We'll be watching, Jackson," the first voice said. "Blackwell's offering a handsome reward for information about the girl." "I wish you luck in your search," Drew said firmly. "Good day, gentlemen." The sound of retreating hoofbeats followed, but Virginia remained frozen in place, afraid to emerge. Eventually, the trapdoor opened, revealing Drew's concerned face. "They're gone for now," he said, helping her out of the cellar. "But they'll be back." Blackwell's cast a wide net. Virginia collapsed onto a chair, the fear she'd been suppressing washing over her. "I'm putting you in danger by staying here." Drew knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Virginia, look at me." When she met his gaze, he continued, "I chose to help you. I'd make the same choice again." Something in the intensity of his gaze made Virginia's breath catch. She realized suddenly how close they were, his face just inches from hers, his hands warm around her own. "We need to leave," Drew said, breaking the moment. "Tonight. They'll come back with more men, maybe Blackwell himself." Virginia nodded, fighting disappointment at the interrupted moment. "Where will we go?" "I have a friend who has a line shack up in the foothills. No one would think to look there." Drew stood, already moving with purpose. "Pack what you can, we'll leave after nightfall." As darkness fell, they set out on horseback. Drew led the way on his gelding while Virginia rode the gentle mare he'd been training. They traveled through the night, avoiding the main trails and keeping to the shadows. Drew's knowledge of the land guided them safely through terrain that would have been impossible for Virginia to navigate alone. By dawn, they'd reached the line shack, a small, rough structure used by cowboys during roundups. It was basic but offered shelter and safety, tucked away in a hidden valley. "We can rest here for a few days," Drew explained as he unsaddled the horses. "Then continue on to Willowbrook when it's safer." The tiny cabin had just one room with a small stove, a table, and a single narrow bunk. Drew immediately offered Virginia the bed, insisting he would sleep on the floor. As days passed in the isolated shack, Virginia found herself growing more drawn to the quiet cowboy. They fell into an easy routine, sharing chores, taking turns cooking simple meals, talking long into the evening. Drew taught her how to play poker with a worn deck of cards he found in a drawer, laughing at her fierce competitive streak. On their fourth night at the shack, a violent thunderstorm rolled through the valley. Rain lashed against the small windows, and wind howled around the corners of the cabin. Virginia sat wrapped in a blanket, jumping at each crack of thunder, not fond of storms. Drew asked gently, stoking the fire to keep the chill at bay. Virginia shook her head. "When I was a child, lightning struck our barn during a storm like this. The fire spread so quickly, we lost 2 horses." She shivered at the memory. "I've been afraid ever since." Drew moved to sit beside her on the bunk, his presence comforting. "My mother used to say that storms were just the sky clearing out its troubles to make way for better days." "That's a nice way to think of it," Virginia replied, managing a small smile. A particularly loud crash of thunder made her start, instinctively grabbing Drew's arm. He placed his hand over hers, his thumb tracing soothing circles on her skin. "You're safe here," he assured her, his voice low and intimate in the firelit cabin. Virginia looked up to find his gaze on her, intense and warm. Something had been building between them these past days, a connection that went beyond the circumstances that had brought them together. In that moment, with rain drumming on the roof and the fire casting golden light across his features, Virginia admitted to herself what she'd been trying to deny. She was falling in love with Drew Jackson. As if reading her thoughts, Drew gently brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Virginia," he murmured, her name a question and an answer all at once. She leaned into his touch, her heart pounding faster than the thunder outside. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Drew bent his head toward hers. Their lips met in a kiss so tender it brought tears to Virginia's eyes. His arms encircled her, drawing her close against the storm and the uncertainty of their future. When they finally parted, Drew rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her face. "I never expected to find you," he whispered. "But now that I have, I can't imagine letting you go." "Then don't," Virginia replied simply, her hands framing his face. She kissed him again, pouring into it all the feelings she couldn't yet express in words. That night, as the storm raged outside, they lay together on the narrow bunk, Virginia's head on Drew's chest, his arms holding her safe. They talked of dreams and fears, of childhoods and hopes for the future. No barriers remained between them, not status or circumstance or the dangers that still pursued them. Morning brought clear skies and difficult decisions. They couldn't stay hidden forever, and Virginia knew that sooner or later they would have to face Harold Blackwell's wrath. "I've been thinking," Drew said as they shared coffee by the morning fire, "about what happens next." Virginia nodded, bracing herself. Their night together had changed everything, yet solved nothing of their practical problems. "I still think Willowbrook is our best option," he continued. "But not just for you to find work, for us together." Virginia's heart leapt. "Together," Drew took her hand. "I know it's fast, we've known each other barely a week, but Virginia, I've never been more certain of anything." His blue eyes held her steadily. "I love you. If you'll have me, I want to build a life with you." Tears sprang to Virginia's eyes. "What about your home, your horses?" "Home is where you are now," Drew said simply. "I can train horses anywhere. We can start fresh in Willowbrook, away from Blackwell's influence." Virginia threw her arms around him, joy replacing the uncertainty that had plagued her since her escape. "Yes," she whispered against his neck. "Yes to all of it." They set out for Willowbrook that afternoon, hearts full of plans and possibilities. The journey would take 3 days if they kept a steady pace, avoiding main roads and settlements where word of the runaway bride might have spread. On the second day of their journey, as they made camp beside a small creek, Virginia voiced the concern that had been nagging at her. "What about my father? I can't just disappear without telling him I'm safe." Drew nodded thoughtfully. "Once we're settled in Willowbrook, we can send word, or even visit when enough time has passed that Blackwell's anger has cooled," Virginia sighed. "His anger won't cool. He's not a man who forgives being denied something he wants." "Then we'll face that challenge when it comes," Drew assured her. Together. Their arrival in Willowbrook the next evening brought welcome relief. The town was larger than Virginia had expected, a proper community with a main street lined with businesses, a schoolhouse, and churches. Drew led them directly to a 2-story building with Coleman's General Store painted across its facade. Inside, they were greeted warmly by Drew's friend, Margaret Coleman, a no-nonsense widow in her 40s who sized up the situation with remarkable speed. After a brief explanation omitting certain details about Virginia's identity, Margaret offered them temporary lodging in rooms above her store. "Frank Peterson's looking to sell his place outside town," Margaret informed them over a hearty meal in her kitchen. "Good land, small house, stable already built, might suit a horse trainer and his bride." Virginia blushed at Margaret's assumption, but Drew simply squeezed her hand under the table. "We'll look into it," he promised. The next morning, they visited the property Margaret had mentioned. The house was simple but sound, with views of rolling grassland perfect for horses. The previous owner had fallen on hard times after his wife's death, eager to sell and move east to live with his daughter. "It's perfect," Virginia breathed, standing on the porch and looking out at what could be their future. Drew wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I've got enough saved to make an offer," he said. "It's not much, but it's a start." Within a week, the house was theirs. The people of Willowbrook welcomed them warmly, accepting without question the story that Virginia was Drew's fiancée from a neighboring county. They were married by the local minister in a simple ceremony with Margaret Coleman as their witness. Virginia wearing a dress borrowed once again, this time from the dressmaker's shop, where she'd found part-time work. Their first night in their new home, Drew carried Virginia across the threshold, both of them laughing at the formality of the gesture given all they'd already been through together. "Mrs. Jackson," Drew said, setting her down gently in their small front room. "Welcome home." Virginia wrapped her arms around his neck, joy making her voice tremble. "I never imagined I could be this happy when I ran from that church. When you hid beside that well," Drew murmured, drawing her close. You changed both our lives. 6 months passed in relative peace. Drew's reputation as a horse trainer spread quickly, bringing steady work. Virginia's skills with needle and thread earned her a full partnership in Willowbrook's dress shop. Their little house became a home, filled with simple furniture they built together and the love that grew stronger each day. They had almost begun to believe they were safe when a letter arrived from Virginia's father. Drew brought it home from town, his expression grave as he handed it to her. With trembling fingers, Virginia broke the seal and read her father's words. Harold Blackwell discovered where we are, she whispered, looking up at Drew with fear in her eyes. He's coming to Willowbrook. Drew sat beside her, taking her hands in his. When? Father says Harold left 3 days ago with men. Virginia's voice caught. He's coming to take me back. He has no right to you, Drew said firmly. We're legally married. Harold doesn't care about legalities when they don't serve him, Virginia replied. You don't know what he's capable of. Drew's jaw set in a determined line. Then we'll face him together. This is our home now, our life. I won't let him take that from us. When Harold Blackwell rode into Willowbrook 2 days later, he found not a cowering woman ready to be reclaimed, but an entire community standing with the Jacksons. Word had spread quickly about the cattle baron coming to cause trouble, and the townspeople had rallied around the couple who had become valued members of their community. Blackwell and his 6 men were met on the main street by Drew and Virginia, standing hand in hand, with Sheriff Thompson and at least 20 townspeople flanking them, Harold's cold eyes fixed on Virginia. You've caused me considerable trouble, girl, he said, his voice carrying in the tense silence. Virginia lifted her chin. I'm not yours to claim, Mr. Blackwell, I never was. We had an agreement, Harold snapped, his gaze shifting to include her father's signature on their marriage contract. Your father and I. An agreement my daughter never consented to, a new voice called out. Virginia turned in shock to see her father dismounting from a horse at the edge of the gathered crowd. He looked older, wearier, but his eyes were clear as he approached to stand beside his daughter. Mr. Miller, Harold acknowledged coldly. I assumed you'd want your daughter returned and our arrangement honored. Virginia's father shook his head. I was wrong to try to force Virginia into marriage, I see that now. He looked at his daughter and Drew, his expression softening. Her happiness is worth more than any cattle or land. Harold's face darkened with rage. This isn't over, he threatened, hand moving toward his gun. Sheriff Thompson stepped forward, his own weapon already drawn. I believe it is, Blackwell. This couple is legally married. The lady made her choice. You have no claim here. For a tense moment, Virginia feared Harold would order his men to fight, but even he could see they were outnumbered. With a final venomous glare, he turned his horse. You'll regret crossing me, he spat. The only regret I had was almost marrying you, Virginia replied steadily. As Blackwell and his men rode out of town, Virginia turned to her father in disbelief. You came all this way. He embraced her tightly. When I got word of what Blackwell intended, I couldn't let him hurt you. I should never have tried to force that match. He looked at Drew with newfound respect. Thank you for protecting my daughter when I failed to. That evening, their small house was filled with celebration. Virginia's father would stay with them for a time before returning to his ranch, already making plans to visit regularly. Friends from town brought food and drink, turning potential tragedy into a gathering of community. As the party wound down, Drew and Virginia found a moment alone on their porch, looking up at the star-filled sky. I can't believe it's really over, Virginia said softly. That we're truly free to live our life. Drew pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that still held the same wonder as their first. We have everything ahead of us now, he murmured. Virginia smiled up at him, her hand gently taking his and guiding it to rest on her stomach. More than you know, she whispered. Drew's eyes widened as understanding dawned. Virginia, are you saying? She nodded, tears of happiness shining in her eyes. I found out yesterday we're going to have a baby. Joy transformed Drew's face as he lifted her in a gentle embrace, spinning her around on the porch under the vast western sky. "I love you," he said fervently, "more than I ever thought possible." As Virginia looked into the eyes of the man, she loved the man who had found her hiding beside a well, and changed the course of her life. She knew that sometimes the bravest choice a person could make was to run from what was wrong toward what was right. 1 year later, Virginia sat in a rocking chair on their expanded porch, their infant daughter Elizabeth cradled in her arms. Drew worked in the corral with a new colt, his gentle methods drawing admiring comments from the ranch hands he now employed. Their property had grown, their reputation as fair employers bringing good workers to their door. Virginia's father visited regularly, doting on his granddaughter and helping expand the business. Harold Blackwell had never returned, finding more trouble with the law than he could manage when his underhanded business practices were finally investigated. As the setting sun painted the western sky in brilliant colors, Drew finished his work and joined his family on the porch. He kissed Virginia tenderly before taking their daughter in his arms, his face softening with love as he gazed at the tiny life they'd created together. "Happy?" he asked simply, sitting beside her and taking her hand. Virginia looked at their home, their land, their child, and the man who had shown her what real love meant. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she answered truthfully. From the moment a frightened bride had hidden beside a well and a kind-hearted cowboy had drawn her close, their future together had been written in the vast, endless sky of the western frontier, a future built on choice, respect, and a love that had found them when they least expected it.